So good night again, everyone. It is 7:05, so we're going to begin. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. Whether it is night where you are or morning, it's always a pleasure to have each and every one of you. My name is Tamoy Campbell, and for an hour or so, we'll be spending some time together as we delve into this amazing session. This session is put on by the UEU Pro Soft and Life Skills Series webinar, and we're very much grateful. The topic for this evening is the leader within. The leader within. Tapping into your inner strength. So I'm very excited, and I know you are also as well. So ensure that you get your paper, get your notepad, get your pens, because we're taking all of the notes tonight. But of course, I'm not the one who will be delivering this presentation. No, that honor is vested in our speaker for tonight, Dr. Ty Richardson. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of information about Dr. Richardson just before we get into the presentation. So, Dr. Ty Richardson is a Trinidadian American serial entrepreneur and coach. So, he has some Caribbean roots, and we love, love, love that. Now, after leaving a 14-year corporate career with a Fortune 100 company, Dr. Ty set his sights on entrepreneurship and launched a social network turned foundation for youth and young professionals, then a commercial capital brokerage firm, and a coaching practice that works with individuals, teams, and executives on discovering their strengths and leaning into it to advance and become more successful. Quite a journey, and all of that impacting so many persons. Absolutely love it. But of course, if you want to get any more information about Dr. Ty, you can definitely find out more, and it's on the screen right there, and it's drtyrichandson.com. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love some emojis. I would love some round of applauses in the chat, and welcome our esteemed speaker for tonight, Dr. Ty Richardson. Please welcome him to our virtual stage. Dr. Richardson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tamoy. I think I might have lost some of the controls, but never mind, we'll work through it. Thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you guys this evening, this morning. As Tamoy said, we have a very global audience, and so I'm really, really excited I get to share this time with you. Now, I've spoken on these platforms before. I'm going to share my video right now so you see me. I've spoken on this platform before. I am in charge of YoPro Global Foundation, who partnered with UE to deliver these series, and we're always grateful when we have such an engaged audience. However, I thought that we'd do something different for this presentation. I want to, even though we've been in a virtual environment for over a year now, I wanted us to try to attempt to do an interactive presentation. So I'm not going to be speaking at you. I want us to have a conversation. So this presentation is designed in a way where a lot of it is really dialogue. There's questions I'm going to ask you, and I really want to encourage everyone who can participate, everyone who's a thought, an idea, a response, or feedback, put it in the chat. Karina and I will be looking at the chat. I'll get to some of the responses. I won't get to all of them, but let's make this a conversation and do something really different tonight. So I'm going to take off this camera, and then I'm going to get started with the presentation. Or maybe I'm not taking off the camera. Okay, so we're actually going to take a journey tonight. We're going to start with understanding a little bit about yourself. Each individual, each person on this call will have an opportunity to share a little bit with themselves, about themselves in the chat, both the explained and the unexplained. We're going to discover your thoughts on leadership, and then we're going to tell you about strengths and how they integrate into that concept. And then we're going to bring it right back to you again. Again, use the chat feature if you can. I'll ask you questions, comment, and let's move forward. Okay, so let's go. So we are all born with a character. How many of you have met a baby or seen a child 4 years, 5 years, 7 years that just has a personality already that you've seen and discovered, like you know by looking at that child what they're going to grow up to. They're either going to be really loud or really quiet, really jovial. But these kids are just born with character. How many of you have experienced that, have seen or encountered that in your everyday life? I know in my coaching practice, we tend to talk about, when people were younger themselves, they had attitude, or they were very funny, or, they sometimes the opposite, they were sad. But these characteristics were very definitive and were very present when they were growing up. And they identified them and they thought, okay, why was I like that? I'm not sure. Or some people can actually trace, well, my dad wasn't home or my mom worked a lot. They could always understand, some people can understand why they were the way they were, but doesn't take away from the fact that, even at a young age, we're born with a character. We're born with definitive traits. We're born with identifying characteristics. And we may or may not know what they are or why they are the way they are, but they're there. And those very same traits we see develop over time. And we know in our formative years, we establish our character. We become the person that we're going to be for our adult lives. We build that foundation. And so our formative years that typically run from the ages of 5 to all the way up to 17, depending on which psychologist you talk to, are the years where we develop habits. We start solidifying that character that we saw before. How many of you can remember, identifying or having an experience that formed a particular part of who you are today in your formative years? I remember I said this was a dialogue, so I want to see dialogue in the chat. Feel free to comment or put any sort of feedback that you have if any of these things resonate with you. So I'm looking for anybody who's sort of in their formative years ended up with some sort of defining moment or defining characteristic. Okay. I can tell you that I was very entrepreneurial during my high school years. I learned a lot when I was, I think in primary school, I understood a little bit about, I was driven and I was motivated, but I didn't know what that meant until I got to secondary school, when I remember this one particular case where I took a box of candy bars, and during recess, I would sell the candy bars to my friends and to other folks that were passing by, and use the money for whatever I wanted later on. But that entrepreneurial spirit, that drive, that creativity, resourcefulness, those were developed in my formative years. And they ended up being translated later on in life into, as Tamoy said in my bio, that serial entrepreneurship, that drive, that passion to create, to do more, to advance. And so, that's an example of how we take a strong characteristic that's innate in us when we are born, and grow and develop it during our formative years. So understanding, these characteristics, they are who you are. They make up you as an individual. They create this identifying pattern. That's right, Richard. Yeah, more of an observer where I take to get to. That's actually a very, very realistic characteristic. So Richard said, I'm more of an observer where I take time to get to know others. And we'll come to an example of what that means later on in the presentation. But that is a very definitive characteristic that was probably solidified in your formative years and stuck with you as you're an adult now. But now that we have a clear understanding of this concept of characteristics development and, who you are today, let's talk a little bit about leadership. So if we were to go into leadership, how would you define leadership? This is a definition that I came up with in doing research for this particular presentation for you guys. So this particular presentation says, a leader is someone who demonstrates what's possible. And to me, that's a very loaded description. I want you guys to put in the chat what you think a leader means, what you've come across in your studies, what you've identified with. What is the definition of a leader to you? So for me, a leader, this is one of the definitions that stuck out to me. A leader is somebody who demonstrates what's possible. And what's possible is so great. It's so vast, right? In one of the Spider-Man movies, with great power comes great responsibility. But and all of that kind of leads into this space of the unknown, right? What is possible? A leader can show you that, can embody that. It's also the same concept of a role model. Laurel says a leader is someone who takes those around them from one level to another. You're absolutely right, Laurel. That is exactly one of the definitions that I also identify with as a leader. Some other definitions that I came up with: a leader is doing what's right when no one is watching, right? So that's also one that's really powerful. Leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. Okay, another construct of looking out of this sort of this admirational, aspirational concept of leadership. Javed said, a leader motivates others to do well. Absolutely. Absolutely. A lead, that goes back to the first definition, demonstrates what's possible. Carrie Ann said, a leader is one who has a vision and builds a team to have that vision visualized or materialized. And that's a great example. The last definition that I came up with that I thought that was a really good approach to leadership was, in leadership, character is more important than strategy. Character is absolutely more important than strategy. And if you have been following along with us so far, even though we're on slide number 3, what you would have noticed is we talked about your character and that innate part of you that you're born as a child and how you develop over the formative years. So hopefully, as we're taking this journey, you're seeing how the pieces make sense, right? So if leadership is character more than strategy, then all of us have the potential to be great leaders, right? Faye said, a leader makes the necessary moves to achieve an objective, right? So a leader isn't afraid of failure as a construct, as a concept. Olwyn says, a leader encourages others to succeed. Again, that concept of bringing people along, right? That character, that's who you are in you. So now that we've taken it from you to this concept of leadership, let's talk a little bit about, one of the things that I'm passionate about, which is strengths, right? That sense of innate strengths that you all have in you. Now, I don't know how many of you, and you can put this in the chat, yes, no, say, raise your hand or otherwise. How many of you have heard of Gallup's Strengthsfinder or Gallup's Strengths Theory? Anybody who's heard of the Gallup Strengthsfinder or the Strengths Theory, that's kind of the direction we're going to go into today. So Gallup Strengths Theory or Strengthsfinder was a longitudinal study that was done over 30 years to study how leaders went from being good to great. All right, Alana, I'm going to tell you about it now. And Christina, this is what it is. They studied 30 of the world's leaders, and they wanted to understand in this study what made a leader go from just being a good leader to being a great leader, right? And the study came up with the fact that all of these leaders had a series of key strengths that they didn't just understand, but these strengths became a part of them. They were aware of what they were. They made it part of their everyday life. They understood what they were dominant in, what they were less dominant in, and what they were least dominant in. That was the only difference with going from good to great. It was that awareness, that consciousness, that understanding of what they were good in, what they were not so good in, and what they were really not so good in. The Strengthsfinder Theory was something that was driven by a gentleman called Donald Clifton. And Donald's theory was, what would happen if we think about what is right with people rather than fixating on what's wrong with them. How many of you, when you were growing up, you might have gotten an A in science and a B in math or a C in math, and all the focus would be on suddenly all the focus would be on your parents. They would be, how do we focus on math? How do we get math up to where it needs to be? And so just like we were told to eat everything on your plate when you were growing up, and now it's no, you should be careful about what you eat. So were we told, oh, you're weak in this, let's pour our efforts and our energy in this. No, more so, what is right with people? What are you good at? What is great? Not what's wrong. What are you weak at? Let's fix the problem. That's the concept in a nutshell, at a very basic theory about StrengthsFinder. Margaret, you're right. One of the books that came out of this study was a book that's called How Full Is Your Bucket? And the theory on that book is kind of similar. It's like, again, let's fill people up with good, positive attributes. Let's stop taking out the negative and depleting what's already good in them. So from this study, they came up with 4 buckets, 4 domains, as we call it, 4 categories of those strengths that all those leaders had, right? The first bucket is a bucket called thinking, the domain called thinking. So this is a bucket that's filled with everybody who's intellectual, everybody whose strengths are focused on thinking skills. And so in this one, it's really likely that if you're dominant in thinking skills, you're likely very good at making great decisions. It's about critical thinking, and it's about making sure that you can analyze data, understand data, research and process data, and then help people translate that data into usable information, right? That's what thinking themes are about. The second one is influencing. So here, influencing is you're really good at gaining momentum. You're really natural at getting people or inspiring people to do something, motivating them, whether you plan it or you don't plan it, you just naturally have that following. This is about bringing attention largely to change, right? In a work setting, you're comfortable with taking charge, you're comfortable with standing up, you're comfortable with getting people along, you're comfortable with moving things forward. Now, this is, as we saw when we looked at this, the slide on leadership, this is one component of leadership, but it's not the only component, right? So we saw multiple definitions and we touched on multiple opportunities for the definition of leadership. This has some of the components, but you're starting to see, even in critical thinking, there are things that are necessary in that skill set for a leader. The third domain is relationship, right? And if you're dominant in this relationship bucket, in this domain, you're highly usually emotionally intelligent. You're a people person. A lot of HR folks have a lot of these strengths. You're probably easy for people to connect with. You're probably easy to understand people. You're probably sympathetic to a lot of causes, but you're also probably able to drive high performance. You're able to get people motivated again because you're able to tap into their skills. And the final bucket is executing. Now, if you're dominant in executing, you get things done. That's it. You know how to make turn words into actions and get things done, right? You're likely somebody who's able to take a vision and run with it, or you're likely to be the person who delivers the presentation and gets buy-in. You're likely to be the person who gets resources assembled so that you can execute. So looking at these domains, Richard, we're coming to that. You're ahead of me a little bit, but yes, we're going to talk a little bit about the combination of these domains. But looking at these domains, where do you guys think you're dominant in, right? I'm not saying that all of your stuff is going to be in one domain. You may have a cross section of all of them, like Richard is alluding to. But which one do you think that you might be dominant in? Do you think you're a thinker, a strategic person? You're in your head a lot? Do you think you're an influencer? You're able to motivate people? Do you think that you might potentially be an executor? You're always the one who's getting stuff done. Or relationship, yeah? I see Lisa. Lisa's sure she's a thinker. That's great. We need a lot of thinkers. Carrie Ann's an executor. Fiona and Charlene are both relationship. I like that. Alana, relationship. Tamoy, executing. I love it. Excellent. So you guys are getting to understand. I love that you're able to identify with the buckets, the domains, and you're able to start seeing, okay, I could be this or I could be that. That's good. So I'm going to ask you guys a question now. So how many strengths do you think they came up with, right? So I'm going to give you a hint. It's less than 50, right? So all of these people that were studied over 30 years, they came up with one by one strengths that made these individuals going from good to great, right? And then they took all these strengths and divided them in these buckets, the buckets you see on the screen right now. But how many strengths in total do you guys think exist? Just give me a random number. I gave you a clue. It's under 50. Put it in the chat. Just share in the chat with me how many you think exist. 43. Simone says 20. Carrie Ann says 30. Okay. I like it. Alana 40. Kathy Ann 49. All right. So there are a total of 34 strengths. 34 strengths. It's an odd number, and I say odd in the sense that we had 4 buckets, but 34 strengths. That means that there's some buckets have more strengths than others. But in total, 34 strengths were identified. And those 34 strengths exist in every single individual, in every leader that was defined from good to great. Every single person has 34 strengths, but they're divided into dominant, less dominant, and least dominant strengths, right? So when you get your chart, your report, it tells you, your first 10 to 12 strengths, those would be your dominant strengths. Your next 10 to 12 strengths, those would be your less dominant strengths. And then finally, your last 10 to 12 strengths would be your least dominant strengths. And the reason that it's worded that way is because even though something is your less dominant, it doesn't mean that it won't show up. You won't use it one day. You may very well use it one day. It's just not natural to you. It doesn't come out when you're not even thinking about it. Okay. And then your least dominant, same thing. One day you might end up doing something that falls in your least dominant bucket of strengths. And, it's not, again, something that you would naturally have done, but you could do it. Right. And so the whole theory behind this is that if you take those 3 dominant, less dominant, least dominance, and you focused on just the dominant, you'll go from good to great. Now you might be asking yourself, why do I have a guy with 2 pens on the screen? Well, it's very simple, right? Very much the same way you have a dominant hand you write with and a less dominant hand you write with. If you wrote your name right now for me, would it be better and more and cleaner and more definitive with your dominant hand or with your less dominant hand? If you are a right-hander and you wrote your name on a piece of paper right now, would it be better with your right hand or would it be better with your left hand? I'm just going to take a wild stab in the dark and I'm going to say your dominant hand or your right hand is going to give you a better handwriting. It's going to give you a better look for your name. Yeah, it is. So at the very basis of this is, why aren't we focusing on the dominant stuff, the hand that's already strong? Why can't we go from good to great with what we already know, with what we love and what we love to do and what's natural and innate to us? No, it's because over the years we've been taught, no, focus on your weakness. Well, the same effort that it takes you to focus on going from weak to average, if we poured that same effort in going from good, where do we end up? We end up at great. That's a very basic theory of Strengthsfinder. So now that I've shared with you and we've gotten out 34 strengths exist, I'm going to ask you guys, like, very clearly, like during the chat, we saw that there were a lot of people who were relationship buckets. There were a lot of people who were executing. So looking at the division of strengths, you guys have seen that division. Which 34 strengths do you think, or which bucket do you think that makes a better leader or a stronger leader? So we saw thinking, we saw influencing, we saw executing, and we saw relationship building. Do you think that there's a bucket that has a better chance of being a good leader? Chris Jansen's relationship executing. Carrie Ann said, I think all. Charlene says relationship. Let me ask you it in a different way. Do you think this guy, Richard Branson, you would agree? Tell me if you agree that he's a good leader. He had Virgin, he's global, he's done so many things. Is he a good leader? Yes or no? Yes. Charlene says yes. So he's a good leader, dynamic, great. What about this woman? Oprah Winfrey. She started off as a TV reporter, moved her way, anchor, moved into, her talk show, now has a magazine empire, an entire network. Yeah, I would agree with you, Carrie Ann, Lisa. I think she's a good leader. What about this guy? This guy, everybody knows this guy, Nelson Mandela, strong in his beliefs, took the country away from apartheid. Yes, Fiona, absolutely. Carrie Ann, absolutely. Of course, yes. Do you think that these three people share the same strengths, the same combination of dominant strengths? Yeah, exactly, Carrie Ann. Veda, Charlene, you got it. You absolutely got it. None of these three people share the same pattern of dominant strengths. They're all unique in what falls in their first bucket, but they're still all great inspirational leaders. So that just really that completely changes. Like there's no roadmap. There's no science to, you have to have this combination in this order to be a good leader. No, these exist because these people have innate strengths, and the only difference is that they've leaned into it. They understood what their strengths were, and they leaned into those strengths. Now I'll share with you, these are the 34 strengths. So in the executing bucket, we have strengths like achiever, arranger, belief, consistency, deliberative, discipline, focus, responsibility, restorative. The reason that I saved these up for you guys is because what I didn't want you to think were that the strengths that we're talking about were things like, time management or ability to prioritize or good at writing emails. Like those are great skills, but they're not strengths, right? Influencing strengths would be activator, command, communication, competition, maximizer, self-assurance, significant, woo. And some of these may not make sense to you right now, right? When you see a strength like maximizer, well, what does that mean, right? And in the case of maximizer, a maximizer is somebody who naturally and innately gravitates to taking something that's already good and making it great, right? That might be somebody who's used to looking at systems or processes and saying, I could do that better, or I think things should be more optimized in a certain way. When we look at relationship building, we see adaptability, developer, connectedness, empathy, harmony, includer, individualization, positivity, and relator, right? So earlier on, we talked about somebody who observes before, I believe it was our friend Richard. So Richard told us that he likes to observe before engaging with people. That's what relator is. Relator is somebody who likes to look at an audience, observe, likes to understand who the person is, and then build a deep relationship with them. That's somebody who doesn't want to, like woo under influencing, walks into a room and makes friends with everybody. Everybody is just the best friend you haven't met yet. And so woo is somebody who wins others over, right? They're not shy. They're the life of the party. They'll walk in and they'll talk to just about anyone. Whereas, again, relator is somebody who's very selective, but when they start engaging with you, they build deep relationships. So if you think about it, woo is very at the top, and relator is very deep. Okay. All of these are strengths, right? So I don't want you to think one is better than the other. They're very different. People who have woo tend to be great at things like sales, business development. People with relator tend to be great at HR functions. So, all of these strengths, they'll appear on somebody's report, and you'll get a better understanding of which one you connect with more. Strategic thinking, we have analytical, context, futuristic, ideation, input, intellection, learner, and strategic, right? Which are some, can you guys just look at the chart and call out one or two, and I can give you guys a greater, just a highlight a little bit more about what that might mean, and we can see if it fits anybody in the room. So just throw a strength out for me in the chat right now, and I'll give you guys a little bit more in depth. So futuristic. All right, Christina, thank you for that. Futuristic is somebody who lives in the future, somebody who can see long term, somebody who spends their time sort of envisioning a world that could be or things that might be possible. And then they help translate it to people who are here. They're great visionaries. They are often people like, you know, one example of somebody who's fantastic is Elon Musk. You know, Elon Musk and SpaceX. The guy, you know, is building, you know, transport to space. You know, who else is, how else do you find futuristic? You know, another person you might think of is Mark Zuckerberg, somebody who saw, well, I can take an app that says yes or no to somebody's face and turn it into a multi-billion-dollar company that does way more than says yes or no. Kathy Ann asked about ideation. Ideation is somebody who thinks about ideas. It's somebody who can, you know, you ask them, hey, what do you think about this? They'll give you 7 or 8 different answers. They're great in brainstorming sessions. They're the person who's, wow, like, how did you come up with that? I don't know. That's somebody who's naturally innate at just throwing out ideas, but is also really good at connecting them, right? So they may say today or tomorrow, they may give you a few ideas. You may not see the connection, but if they spend some time with it, they're usually able to link it. And afterwards, you say that it makes sense. Shelley wants to talk about restorative. Restorative, those would be people who like to fix things, right? Have you ever had that friend or that person who, you know, is always talking about, wanting you to talk about a problem or always fixing somebody else's problem or somebody's life? That is restorative, right? They tend to want to fix cars. They tend to want to fix anything that's broken. It could be a relationship, it could be a company, it could be a job, it could be somebody's personality. You know, they're fixers, and they want to make things better. I gave you the example of Elon Musk being futuristic. He's also restorative. He took the car, the traditional car that we know, and he reinvented it into the electric car. And so now, and he was an early adopter for that, because now other companies are starting to attach or have started to attach to it. But he came up with the idea. Shelley wants to know what deliberative is. Deliberative people are your auditors. They're people, your insurance people. They're people who see the risk before you do. They're people who are able to identify pitfalls and challenges. Sometimes they may come across as negative, but they're so critical for people who like are futuristic and ideate and have ideation. They tend to want to go and they live in their head. Deliberative people tend to say, okay, I understand that you think that that's great, but here are the things you also need to consider. So they're really good at double balancing us out and keeping us grounded. Individualization. Karina, individualization is the ability to form unique relationships with individuals. Every person you have an individual connection to is different to the next person and the next person. There are people who are not generic friends. They're people who, when you ask them, they remember things, they're very focused, they stick to what you guys have one-on-one. That tight one-on-one that you have, that's the focus. Nobody can ever get in that. Nobody else can identify with that. That's individualization. Lastly, Faye, I'm going to tell you about relator. So we talked about relator and we contrasted it to woo. Relator is a powerful, powerful strength, because what relator means is that not only do you form deep relationships, but you like to work with those people as well, whether it's a project at the office or you just maintain friends. Most relators have lifelong friends, friends for over 20 years, maybe friends from elementary school or high school. They're people who value those deep, deep relationships, and they make sure that they're sustained, they're fed, and they're part of their lives ongoing, because that's what they need to give them life, to fulfill them. So that's just a taste of what these domains have in them for leaderships and strength. So how do you tap into it? You know, how does somebody, you know, take all of this information that I've shared with you? Well, it's simple. There's an assessment. It's called Strengthsfinder 2.0. It's online, so anyone can take it. But when you take the assessment, it gives you a little chart like this. It's a colorful chart, and it tells you the ranking of your top 5 strengths. And whichever bucket those fall into, then you know if you're an executor or an influencer or a relationship builder or a strategic thinker. And based on that, again, you can lean into finding out, are you in the right job? Is this impacting your relationship? Maybe you need to reevaluate some of the people that you're around. How is this impacting your church life? So all of these things, all of these strengths have an impact on your satisfaction level. And the construct, again, I repeat, the construct is if you first are aware and you discover your strengths, then you understand and learn the language of strengths, meaning, I am this, I do this, I believe in this, I don't like this. Then you can start leaning into it. And once you start leaning into it, as we talked about that left hand versus right hand, you go from having a pretty crappy handwriting of your name to an almost perfect, well-practiced, well-delivered illustration of who you are. So often people say, well, Ty, you've spent so much time talking about strengths, dominant, less dominant. What about weaknesses? Like, is it your theory to disregard or dispel weaknesses? And actually, the answer is no. The answer is no. First of all, we don't like to use the concept of weaknesses. It implies, again, that, there's some sort of failure, which is not a bad thing, but in somebody's character, it is not a good thing. And weaknesses are something that we get out of the way and we say, well, there are things that you're going to be less dominant at, or things you're going to be least dominant at. And for those things, we do need to figure out how to deal with them. We don't ignore them. You should always know what they are. But instead of ignoring them, we find a way to support them without us having to invest in them. So we invest in tools, resources, people, other ways to address those weaknesses. For example, I'm somebody who's not analytical. I hate doing accounting. For my business, sometimes I've got to do accounting. Guess what? There are services that I can pay to do that accounting for me. So I don't have to sit down and try to do something I'm not fond of, I'm not good at. I have a friend of mine who has harmony in his least dominant strengths. Harmony is a strength that helps you build consensus, that removes conflict from your environment. He works in a gym. How many people are going to have conflict? A lot of people are going to have conflict in a gym. There's a lot of testosterone in a gym. So what he's done is he's hired on his team someone who has harmony as their dominant strengths. And they're able to look at possible things that happen, ways that conflict might arise, and they're able to dispel it. And it's such an effect. In essence, the way we handle weaknesses is we, for lack of a better word, outsource them. We build structures around us, whether it's technology, whether it's people, whether it's services, software. We don't ignore them. We just find a way to work with them. But the best solution for handling weaknesses is always a team. It's whether it's your church group, whether it's your family at home, whether it's your office environment, whether it's your peer group at school, working with people who understand their strengths and pairing your strengths with their strengths only serves to make a powerful force. And I say powerful force because when you have people who are operating with multiple buckets of strengths in tandem, you can cover all 34. You can cover all 4 domains. And when you have everything covered, as somebody said in the chat earlier on, when you have a full cross section of all of the domains, you've got an amazing, powerful team and dynamic leadership. So how do my strengths equal leadership? I told you at the very beginning, we're going to come right back to you. When we identified your character as a child, at that 4-year-old, that 7-year-old, and we developed in your formative years, that habit, those behaviors, we're now able to, using this Gallup study, identify and clearly state, this is what those behaviors are. This is what naturally is good to you. This is what you were born with and that you grew and developed in your formative years. Once we know that, the next thing is we're going to lean into it. Once we lean into it, we're going to have an amazing time of just doing what we're naturally good at, what we're happiest about. And you will see your quality of life go from where you are today to 3 times better. If you're doing what you love to do, if you're doing what you're naturally good at, you will inevitably be happier at life, at work, in your relationships, at church. Overall, you would be happier. It's all about you. So with that, we've come to the end of the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has, or anything anyone might know, feedback or comments. There were a lot of comments in the chat. A few folks knew about the Strengthsfinder assessment. I'd love to see or hear from anyone who's already engaged with it. I know Margaret participated in How Full Is Your Bucket? So I'm curious, like, what has been your experience? Anybody who's already experienced the assessment, what's been your experience with it? How do you feel about it? While we wait for Margaret, Margaret said, awesome, very good. I appreciate that. How much of our baby character, Christina's asking, how much of our baby character is seen in individuals beyond their formative years? Actually, so we can't test babies per se for, this type of assessment. We can allude to the fact that during your formative years, you are building off of something that was already there. It's very difficult for you to create something new. It's not impossible, very difficult for you to create something new. But the reason that I started from your baby characters, because very often we see children today that have a very definitive personality, a very distinct character. And kids today are frankly smarter than kids yesteryear. We're talking about kids who know how to work an iPad, who know passwords, and they are able to unlock devices. Our kids today are so much more advanced than we were a few years ago. And that sort of advancement, that stimulated brain activity translates into more aggressive learning and development, more aggressive formative development in their formative years. When we look at where we were back then and what we had, our skill sets may not have been as refined, but they were there. And our formative years really are the first time for us to test and identify what they were or might have been as we grow and develop. Christina is also asking another question. What about it being suppressed based on the environment? Okay, that's a very good question. Suppressed behavior, any sort of withdrawal from what is naturally innate in you can have an impact on your outcome, your life. But the reason that these are innate is because they were there with you when you started. They were there with you in your early years, and they stayed with you in your formative years. In your formative years, you may not have gotten to tap into them. And what that might result in is they may still be a lesser dominant strength, but they won't be a least dominant strength. What they'll end up being is they'll end up being something that you tap into. You don't know you're tapping into. You may not know it's innate in you, but once you start the process of understanding your strengths and leaning into it, then your true nature will come out, right? And while the assessment itself does not change, it will certainly enlighten some things that you might have thought you were suppressing or didn't know you were suppressing. The assessment will always give you a true picture of what you like and what you don't like. And at the end of the day, if something falls as your number 13 instead of your number 10, that's understandable. You still tap into it, you just don't tap into it as much, again, to your point, because of suppression.
May I ask a question?
Sure. Yes, why don't you tell us your name and ask us your question?
I'm Andre Bernard. Thank you for the presentation,
Thank you,
by the way. I want to know, how do you deal with situations where people respond to what you conceive your strengths to be as intimidating when people find that, the things that you consider to be strengths for you either intimidate other people or seem as if it's too much for them? How do you respond to that?
That's a very good question, Andre. It aligns to another question that comes up in everybody in people's lives when they're going for job interviews, and people say, well, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, right? And what I have done is, I took this Strengthsfinder when I was 23 at the first point in my career, and I used it as a tool to give me insight as to who I was. And every point thereafter, I was unapologetic about going into environments, team environments, whether that was work or otherwise, and disclosing right up front, like, here's what I'm good at, and here's what I'm not good at. Here's how I perform, and here's where I am at my best, and here's where I am at my not so best. And so what I encourage you to do in those scenarios is let people know, I understand what you're saying. I know that to you it seems intimidating, and there's nothing I can really do about that because that's how you feel. However, I will say, this is what I'm good at. These are my strengths. This is what I can deliver excellence to you with. And if this is a handicap or a drawback to you, I understand that. I can appreciate it. I can make myself aware of it so I can alter perhaps my communication to you, but it's not something that I can change or am willing to change at this point. And then you have that frank conversation. Are the goods that I'm able to offer better than what you see as a drawback? Or in this case, I'm now confronting you and telling you, this is how I react, this is how I feel, this is who I am, this is what makes me great. So even though you see it as a drawback, it is the thing that makes me who I am, and it is the thing that I'm comfortable being. So is that enough for you? That's the conversation I would have.
Thank you so much. So it's about owning it then, and although you're being understanding of what the other parties are experiencing, you're not anyway dimming your own light. That's
Exactly.
what I got from that.
Exactly. Own it. Own your strengths, own your less dominant and your least dominant strengths. But you cannot take away from the effort, energy, and time you're investing in your dominant strengths for greatness to go fix something in your less or your least dominant area because somebody's offended.
That's powerful. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
No problem. No problem at all. Jerome's asking, how would you advise someone to deal with an environment dominated by one type of leader that is different to your dominant strengths? For example, I may be a relator, but I'm surrounded by woo dominant leaders who only recognize other people with similar traits as leaders. This is a great opportunity, Jerome. Thank you for your question. It goes back to kind of what I just told Andre. The biggest opportunity that everyone has in environments like that is knowledge. I would offer an opportunity for these guys to be exposed to this assessment or any other assessment, frankly, that allows them to see for themselves, this is the type of leadership you're providing. These are the type of people you have in the group. And this is who I am. And when you give people the power, the knowledge of knowing this is the makeup of the environment that we're in, and this is why it's impacting either our performance, the way we want to go, anything to that nature, this is how we can fix it. It starts with awareness. If you're conscious of everyone's strengths, you're conscious of the makeup of the team, then you can be conscious about how to address it. Because inevitably, there's got to be conflict if people aren't aware of how dominant they are, if they aren't aware of who else makes up the team, if there are people on the team feeling suppressed, there's got to be conflict. And nobody wants conflict, regardless of who they are. It's usually symptomatic of they just didn't know it was there and they didn't know how to address it. And by giving them the knowledge about who exists in the team, who people are, you're starting that road, that discussion. You're starting to help them overcome something they probably do want to overcome. They just don't know how. Does that answer your question, Jerome?
Yes, it did. Thanks a lot for that. That was a very in-depth and meaningful response. So thanks a lot again, Ty, for the excellent presentation.
No problem at all. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. Does anybody have anything else before we wrap up? Okay, with that, I'm so ecstatic and grateful that we had this time. I'm also excited that my little experiment worked, that we could have it interactive. You guys were an amazing audience. You participated. I really, really appreciate that. I'm going to steer a lot more of my presentations like this to a more interactive audience. If you guys ever need anything at all, anyone in the group, please feel free to email me. If you ever want to take the assessment, it's online. You can just Google Strengthsfinder 2.0. If you need more help or direction, I can help you with that. If you want to learn more about me and what I do, and perhaps some of these team conversations you guys need to have, you can also check out my website. So again, I appreciate everyone. Feel free to email Karina any feedback that you've had. And Karina, if there's anything you want to add to wrap up. I know on behalf of YoPro, we want to thank you guys for participating and look forward. We've got more sessions coming up over the next 2 months. But Karina, anything else you want to add, Tamoy?
Yes, Dr. Richardson, I would only come in to express my gratitude on behalf of YoPro and everyone here who really enjoyed your session. One, it was engaging, it was insightful, we learned so much. And for me, I just really always like these opportunities to just learn a lot more, and I think everyone can say it was an awesome presentation. So thank you so much for your time and your efforts in being here with us and to just making it an awesome presentation, as I said before. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tamoy.
And I hope everyone could put some applause in or some emojis in the chat just to show our gratitude and appreciation.
Well, thank you all for that. Thank you very, very much.
I will only wrap up by saying, everyone, that we do have permission to share the recording. So, as Dr. Richardson would have said, you can reach out to Miss Dice, and I'm sure she will drop her email in the chat. So, please feel free to reach out, and you can request the recording. And of course, please reach out to Dr. Richardson so you can be your best selves and unlock the true leader that is within. On behalf of everyone here, it was my pleasure being your moderator. I'm Tamoy Campbell signing out. And whether it's good morning or good night, have a great day, everyone, and please keep safe. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thanks for a great session.